Welcome back. So the title of this mini lecture is World War I at Home. Let's get into it. So the U.S. enters the First World War in 1917, and we're going to be a part of the conflict until 1918. The conflict, although our participation in it was short-lived, is important for understanding the context of how Americans thought about sport, how they thought about the body, and any number of other aspects related to athletes and athleticism. All right. So one of the first contextual points for us to understand is what's called the CPI and the 4-Minute Men. So part of the Wilson administration's goal when the war began was to get control of and to craft and curate the messaging for the public about the war. The Committee of Public Information, or CPI, did just that. So it's run by a man by the name of George Creel, and the goal for Creel was to be able, with his committee, to again curate, craft, and disseminate this message for the public about the war. So it's going to be, against the Germans. It's going to sort of craft, sort of a view on Germany. It's going to craft a view on sort of German politics and society and life at this time, and any number of other aspects of the conduct of the war. And of course, they're going to make use of the multimedia tools of the day to be able to get this messaging out. So you're going to see the use of posters. You're going to see the use of other forms of print media. You're even going to see the use of expositions, right? Essentially, great patriotic fairs to be able to promote the war to the public. Another example of this was what were called the 4-Minute Men. They had speeches that were approved by the government. They would speak for about 4 minutes, and they would go to any number of public spaces to be able to give these speeches by the thousands all across the country and in a number of languages. The next thing for us to note is what's called the draft or selective service. So, the overwhelming majority of those who would serve in the U.S. military during the First World War were drafted. The draft itself was constructed mindful of what had happened during the Civil War. This is why, as the war begins, you see the enactment of draft laws, but it's referred to as the Selective Service Act. Now, when it came to service, there was often kind of a discourse in the country going on. So you have folks who registered for the draft, the process of being drafted, and then deploying to France. When it came to, though, whether or not folks were being properly supportive of the war at home, there was a feeling on the part of the Wilson administration that maybe the administration didn't have enough of its own tools to provide oversight. And so you had at the time something called the American Protective League, or the APL. So the American Protective League was this auxiliary of the Justice Department that saw itself as providing kind of loyalty oversight amongst the public. So if you're at home, if the idea is that your state maybe doesn't necessarily have enough resources to be able to check and make sure that folks are following along with programs on a day-to-day basis, APL agents are going to kind of pick that up and to kind of move that forward. Now, historian Christopher Capizzola brings this up as a kind of discourse between vigilance and vigilantism. I'm paraphrasing his work there, but the APL, again, brings up also questions of the First Amendment and this kind of thing, because they would also hold what were called slacker raids. It's an organization that there's still some questions about today for historians. All right. Another term for us to be mindful of during the war is what's called the Food Administration. So the Food Administration dealt with a lot of conservation efforts in regards to food in the United States, because the U.S. saw itself, especially in 1917 and 18, as a nation that not only was going to be deploying individuals to go serve, but was also deeply concerned about meeting food needs of its allies. And this was especially the case in the Midwest, in a place like Illinois, which produces more food than pretty much any other state in the country in 1918. Now, when it comes to other elements for us to be mindful of, again, there's also what's called the fuel administration. The goal was to, again, conserve fuel and others. All right. Thanks so very much.